in Stamp's Distinguished Speaker Series. Today we are thrilled beyond belief to be presenting Brazilian visual artist Vik Muniz. Yeah. This has been a very, very long time coming. I want to let you folks know it has been 10 years that I have been in a dialogue with Vik and his manager, Erica, his studio manager, Erica, to get him here. He is the longest ever invitation that has gone on as a correspondent, so we are very happy to have waited the 10 years because Vik's life and body of work have grown and expanded in that time. Many of you, I believe, will have read, there was a long, wonderful article in the New York Times maybe 3 Sundays ago about exciting work he's been doing at the MIT Media Lab, which you'll get to see some of today. And also, we'll soon see his hand in the upcoming Paralympic Games coming from Rio, the Summer Olympics, because he's on the culture team producing artistic interventions. So 10 years is a long wait, but a deeper, more evolved artist we present. So I want to thank our partners for their support of today's program, the Institute for the Humanities, the University of Michigan Museum of Art, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. Just one shout out for the great partner we've had all year long and many years from the Museum of Art here. And just to give them some props, they were just recently recognized as the top #1 university art museum in the country by Best College Reviews. The ranking notes, pushing the definition of what it means to be an art museum. The University of Michigan Museum of Art's massive expansion and remodel has made this museum into the new town square for the 21st century. So, we're pleased to have them on campus. They do indeed own 2 works by our artists today, which are used much in their teaching and museum study room, so you should check those out. They have Death of Chatterton from the Pictures in Chocolate, and also Medusa Marinara. Week 2 of surveys, folks, please help me with this. We really need this information from you. As you entered the theater today, you probably noticed or may have been handed a paper survey to take. Please do it. The answers that we get back to these surveys are absolutely directly going to impact how we move forward and market this series next year. So it only takes 2 minutes. It's 8 questions. The most important questions are question number 3 and question number 4. So if that's all you fill out, I'm happy with that. But if anyone, especially folks who are not getting all of their information online, with tightening budgets and ever scrutinized dollars spent, any marketing that we do for print advertising, our beautiful printed calendar that we, put out, we have got to defend doing these things. So please, if you do find out about us in any of those ways, let us know. Every survey will be counted. Please do remember to turn off your cell phones. We will have a Q&A today in the screening room as usual, if you would like to come and ask Vik some questions there. And now to give you a proper introduction to his work, please welcome Stamp School Associate Professor Rebecca Modrak.
Hi. Hello. For me, part of the wonder of Vik Muniz's work has to do with the context in which it first emerged. So we'll travel back in time, just 20 years, to when some of you were -1, to a time when photography was still thought about in very technical terms. I had just started teaching photography, and the facility at that university had something they called a densitometer. Somehow, or fortunately, I had stumbled through my entire education without hearing of this machine, but now there it was. It even had its own room. It was a Cold War era looking apparatus that could measure the amount of light passing through film. It claimed to identify a perfect negative by plotting numbers on a chart, and was a reminder of the side of photography that finds comfort and meaning in thinking there are measures of control, information, and standardization in the process of making photographic images. I learned about the densitometer and then never used it. And of course, I was convinced that my negatives were therefore imperfect, which made me feel slightly guilty, but also a little rebellious. Now imagine that into this world of technical rubrics and guilt, there's another room somewhere, and in it, Vik Muniz is creating his own negatives made of chocolate. With precision and craft, but with no densitometer, there are no rules for chocolate syrup. In her review at the time, Vicki Goldberg wrote that with this work, Muniz, quote, wrought gentle mayhem on photographic representation. Vik Muniz has inspired generations of artists to reimagine media as opportunity for discovery. Going forward, he left his studio room with projects like Wasteland that recognize the value of materials in their own contexts and social groups. If most images or photographs are inadequate representations of real objects, one step removed from the pulsating world, the Muniz's photographs bring us as close as possible to the things behind the appearances, because the subject of his images is also the content. Please join me for the honor of welcoming Vik Muniz.
Whoa. There's a lot of people here. I don't usually go to things like this, so I'm always very surprised when people come to hear me talk. You know, whenever I'm in front of a crowd as substantial as this, I can't help but thinking, what am I doing here? What brought me here? And if it is some comfort, you know, I just have to think that everything that we've done in our entire lives, where we were born, what we ate, our friends, the records we'd heard, the pictures we saw, conspired so we could be here this evening. So it's no coincidence that we're here, so I have to do my part. For my part, there are some auspicious events that bring me here tonight. Perhaps the most important of them is my birth. I was born in Brazil in 1961 from a working class family. My father was a waiter, and my mother worked at as a switchboard operator. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a defunct profession. And then I had to stay with my grandmother during the day. My first memory, it's me on her lap, and she's teaching me how to read. I may be around 4 and a half. We're sitting on a greenish gray sofa, and she's teaching me how to read by just covering and uncovering with my index finger the words of an old Encyclopedia Britannica that my dad had won on a pool table, in a pool game. That was the only book we had in our house, you know. There's nothing particularly interesting about this, except that she was teaching me how to read the way she taught herself how to read. And given the fact that she had never been to school, and nobody knows how she did it. Nobody knows how she did it, you know. By the time I was 7, I entered the school, and I was already reading chapter books, simple things like, you know, Treasure Island and versions of Treasure Island in Portuguese, Robin Hood, Gulliver Travels and things. But to my surprise, it took me 3 years to learn how to write and read, because as long as you break a word into letters or syllables, I wouldn't recognize it anymore. I could only read certain fonts, only the Encyclopedia Britannica font. And I also could not read cursive language because I was a self-taught dyslexic person. You know, I was taught to be dyslexic, and therefore taught to read visually by looking at the words instead of actually organizing them into systems. I think that has something to do why I'm here talking to you today, because when, by the time I was 9, my copybooks, you know, whenever I was taking dictation, whenever I could not write a word, I would just make a little drawing. It was a way for me to actually get through, and then I would just research and and do it. But my copybooks at that time looked like the Egyptian section of the Metropolitan Museum. They were hieroglyphs. And from those little drawings, they kept improving and improving and improving. Pretty soon, I was the guy who writes caricatures of teachers and pass them around in the back of the class. Every class has one of these guys. You know that. You remember, you're thinking of him right now. Normally a boy. When I was 14, I went to a contest organized by all the public schools in the state of São Paulo. It was an art event, and the first prize was you take 2 years of classes of academic drawing. I never forgot this day. Sometimes one day can change the entire course of your life. I remember for the first time, I went to a place where all the kids were just as weird as I was. The kids liked drawing, they liked doing the things that I like, and then I made lots of friends. And at the end, the prize already was the day, but they gave me a 2-year course on academic drawing when I was 14. But picture this, when you're 14, you spend your entire afternoons drawing naked people. I didn't miss a class. I was very good at it, so by drawing, I started, when you start drawing and learning how to draw, there's a curve, that you learn a lot, you improve a lot. At one point, you start getting to your limit, and you're trying to push it. But then that's something that you can do with hand-to-eye coordination, and your understanding what you're doing leads you to understand what you're doing in other areas. I was always very, very curious how we see 3 dimensions in a 2-dimensional space, how perspective works. And I started researching on my own all kinds of information about how do we see pictures. So the whole idea of phenomenology of vision I became obsessed with it. So I started reading all texts that were available at that time. I remember one in particular was a text by James Jerome Gibson, was a scholar from Princeton that was developing a study for the Air Force at the time when people needed to improve the interface of jet planes. So it was one of the first people to actually be a psychologist specialized in perception, And I became fascinated by that kind of thing, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to work experimentally, trying to find out how we saw things. Unfortunately, the exam for the University of Psychology in São Paulo was a very general one, and since I wasn't very good in certain disciplines like math, and I couldn't make it twice, and I settled for advertising as an option for university. So I only went for 6 months. And I was a half scholarship. And I remember, actually what I wanted to do, I wanted to airbrush naked people on ice cubes for whiskey commercials. That's what they wanted. There was a big thing at the time. There was a book named Subliminal Seduction. So you could actually control people's mind by putting little skulls and things. And I wanted to do that. They never let me do it. But I remember... I remember another thing that was very important, and I think brings me here, is the fact that this learned dyslexia, always put me in a point. Whenever I was driving, I could never, especially in the 70s in São Paulo, I could never read the billboards. I could drive the whole day without. It was great because I had no money. I didn't feel like buying anything. But I would drive, if you ever been to São Paulo, there were billboards on the Jockey Club, on this marginals. There's a road there that you go for like 110 kilometers an hour, and the billboards are parallel to the road, and 3 lines of text, and they're advertising toys. So you would have to be a baby that can read very fast, 3 lines backwards to buy the toy. So it would be, they were completely wrong. So I remember going with my mother once, and she went to the bank, and I went around the block. I said, "Mom, can you read that?" She said, "No." So I went again 10 kilometers an hour slower, I said, what about now? She said, no. So when again, 10 kilometers, until I was like going 20 an hour, she said, oh, now I can read it. So I made notes, I started making a chart. For 6 months, I developed a chart that crossed vectors of speed, angle of approach, font, the size of the letters, and actually the number of lines that somebody can read frontward or backwards, you know. And so to improve the readability of billboards. Text was very important then. We didn't have digital images that could speak for themselves. We're not living at the age of just do it yet. So it was just, text was very important. So I went to, there were only 2 companies that dealt with point of sale advertising in São Paulo. I went to one of them and I offered my services as a consultant. They hired me, paying me very little, you know. And at the end of the year, based on this chart that I had developed, they decided to grant me a prize. You know, it was a really ugly little plexiglass trophy, this big, you know. The day I went to pick up the prize, I rented a tuxedo for the first time in my life, felt absolutely ridiculous, went by myself, didn't know anybody, received the prize, said thank you, and when I was leaving, you know, I had my car parked in the back of the event. By the time I was going to the front, I see something very ugly. 2 people wearing tuxedos, fighting. One of them was had brass knuckles, was hitting the other guy on top of a car. The fiancé of the victim stopped the car and asked me to break the fight apart, which I stopped, and I did. I pushed the assailtant. He ran away, and I was on my way to my car. The victim, thinking that I was his assailtant, you know, picked up a gun in his car and shot me. You know, luckily, it wasn't fatal. And even more luckily, the guy who shot me was rich. That's how I got to bribe him for cash money, and that's how I bought a ticket to come to the United States in 1983. And that is the most auspicious event that brings me here today. I got shot in the leg. That's how I got here. You know, sneaky immigrants. I got to New York, first to Chicago. I came to the Midwest first, you know, and then after a 6 months period, I just came to learn English. I just wanted to learn English and leave and go back because I thought English was going to be very important. It's funny that we were running out of time, but I have to say, I remember I went to a class at night in a program called MoMA, and in my class there were like Polish, Italian, Koreans, Mexicans. They were very loud people, and they had one teacher that came, and then she, very small, very minute stature, and she said, "Today we're gonna study the verb to be." Obviously, you know, at the end of 6 months, I learned Korean, Italian. I didn't learn any English. I only started learning English when I started taking cooking and carpentry classes. And then somebody said, "Okay, can you get me an eggplant?" I would get every single vegetable that they would. This one, this one. So even so, I learned everything visually. I made a mistake. When I was about to leave, I decided to spend one weekend, it was 4th of July weekend in New York. And it was a weekend that lasted 30 years. When I arrived there, I just fell in love with the city. And I said that I was living there. I moved to New York 2 weeks after and stayed there for a long, long time. But let me go back a little bit. You know, there was something going on also that brings me here that's very important. I was raised during a military dictatorship. Not that I was tortured or waterboarded or anything, but when you have that kind of political system, you have a media environment that is installed that affects you somehow, and I'm deeply affected by it. During a military dictatorship, you cannot say what you want to say just directly. You have to find creative ways to do it. You have to resort to metaphors, you know. So probably our greatest expression, cultural expression in Brazil is music. So you have amazing people like Caetano Veloso, Chico Buarque, Gilberto Gil. They were singing love songs at the time, but if you could read the codes, you know, they were probably making severe critics to the government. If you could read the codes, you'd be an intellectual. And that separates you from the people who are just led by the information that was going around. Also, when you are living under a military dictatorship, you receive lots of information that are very biased, and you become very cynical about it. I think that cynicism and that penchant for metaphor influenced a lot of what I came to do later. By the late 70s, I could not hear any more political pamphletism. I was sick of any kind of political inclination. Everything seemed to have a goal, you know. And I wasn't interested in how to use media to get to things. I was more interested in how to use media, how to create new things. In my generation, people couldn't do, you know, they were tired of politics. And there were beautiful things that were happening in Brazil at the time, and I was involved in experimental theater. And when I moved to New York, the first thing I decided to do was to do theater. But then it was hard because the avant-garde here was different, you know. The avant-garde in New York, you had like people like Richard Foreman, where like a lot of middle-aged, unattractive, ugly, naked men holding, you know, rats, screaming obscenities for 3 hours non-stop. You had that, and you had cats. And I felt like I couldn't really, there was no place for me to act in the middle. So I did what all young people in New York did. I went out, I drank, I did parties. I was a bartender at the area, at the Palladium. I had an amazing time in New York in the 80s. And it was culture by osmosis, you know. I was living in the East Village, a rat-infested place that became a cultural mecca by convenience, you know. And all of a sudden, I started seeing all these galleries pop out. There's a time, no, there's a lot of young people in the audience. This is really, really important, okay? There's one time in your life when you're gonna feel that, again, all the films, all the songs, all the books you read, you know, they're not just coming to you. The tide sort of changes, and you see people your age actually producing the culture that's actually, you know, it's the predominant culture. I was 26 at the time, and I was living in this village, and I saw a few things by Jeff Koons and Cindy Sherman. Nobody had to explain that to me. If I hadn't decided to become an artist before, it's because there was no art that reflected my own view of things, the way I grew up. I am the first generation of artists that were influenced directly by electronic media. By saying electronic media, I say television, visual electronic media. And in my entire life. And I am the first person that had to, the first generation of people that had to struggle deeply trying to find a place between fact and fiction, you know, in my way to place my desires. When I first saw Cindy Sherman's film stills, for me it was obviously there was somebody trying to find a place into this sort of limbo that separates our, you know, our projected dreams that as we see it on a film and from our own inner lives. This idea of outside, inside has always been present in my work. I decided to become an artist right there. Actually, I decided to become an artist one afternoon at the Met. It was a show called The Princely Collection of Liechtenstein. In this show, they had an enormous presence of paintings by Rubens. You know, these paintings were as big as this screen, and there was an enormous array of subjects. There was nudity, you know, abundance, luxury. Rubens was the Jeff Koons of his time. You know, he had more assistants than Jeff Koons had. And then he could make paintings that reflected his zeitgeist, his time. When I looked at that and I saw people doing this, they just look at one part of the painting, they look at another, they were switching channels. That's the kind of art that got obsolete because of TV. I said, I don't want to do that. But then on the adjacent room, there was a line. And as a good Brazilian, if I see a line, I just stay in it. You know, maybe they're giving something for free. By the end of this line, there was one portrait of a little girl named Clara Serena. She was Rubens' daughter. She is about 5 years old. There's something for some of you who draw pictures, you know, especially portraits of people who you love or you're very familiar with. You know that when you draw somebody you know very well, you tend to make overstatement, or you overlook certain things. You don't look at it, you look at it more as a symbol, as what it represents to you effectively, you know. It's very hard to coldly paint somebody you know and you love a lot. In this picture, however, Rubens had painted his beloved daughter, beautiful girl, with all the little dissymmetries, all the imperfections. One eye is slightly lower than the other, the eyebrow is slightly longer, the mouth is a little crooked, without missing an ounce of affection for the subject he was painted. I made that line about 10 times until the museum closed. And I decided that this is what I wanted. A picture that relied on a line, relied on an approach. There's something about museums, that why you go there. You take a shower, you take a bus, and you go, and there's a picture there. It's a ritual, but it's a ritual that is contrary to the flood of images that come towards you all the time. You're doing something different. You're just going voluntarily towards a picture. And that's very important that you do that, because you actually, you're placing yourself into the media environment as an actor. You're participating in it. I always wanted to be a wall artist, because I want the entire body to be part of this experience. I spend a long time in museums looking at people looking at pictures. Sometimes I don't even go to look at pictures, just look at people. If you just do this very cynically, you realize that in some cases you enjoy it more than if you go to look for the pictures. Because people are funny. They walk towards a picture, and they go like this. They stop as if there's a landscape here, okay? And they stop as if there's tape on the floor. All is at the same spot. Why? Because our eyes are very similar, they're the same distance, and they go where they comfortably fit the frame. So they can go into that realm that was idealized by an artist, something that exists there, like beautiful, idyllic landscape that an artist painted, say a Bob Ross painting. And then all of a sudden, they go back like this, and then they're back in the museum, they're safe. Okay, I'm not crazy, right? But there's something else. People do that, and then they do this, look. They do this again and again. Why? Why do they do it? It's really simple. By the time they see the landscape, they see something that was an idea, something that came from the mind of somebody else. When they get close to it, they see material, they see paint, something that's very mundane. It was dug from the ground or taken from the oils taken from animals, And then they go back, they see the picture, they see an idea. They go closer, they see material. Between material and idea, it's none of these polarities are important. The important part is exactly when they cross the threshold, when these seemingly, meaningless materials become an idea. It's just like when the basketball has left the little hands of the basketball player, hasn't reached the rim yet. It's a moment of change, a moment of truth and transformation. That's the sublime in art. The moment that we connect with something that is outside of us. I was asked many, many times, what is art? For 30 years, I could never get a good short explanation for it. And I said, this is really lazy. I have to think of one, At least a short one, so I don't have to explain it too much. And I have a good one that it's good and it's bad. Art is the development of the interface between mind and matter. It is good, but it's bad because it serves as an explanation for science and religion and everything else that has to do with belief. Belief is very important because when you see a picture, you let yourself be fooled by it. Anything that can be understood, that can have meaning, relies on a little bit of illusion. I always wanted to work with illusion, thinking about reality, because these are very counterparts. One does not exist without the other. You have to be fooled by the sounds that are coming from my mouth right now to believe that they are meaningful words, and so on. It's always like that. It was through illusion, without being fooled temporarily, that we got where we are. If you imagine a long time ago in a cave, a man walked about 40,000 years ago. A guy walks in and he sees in the cracks of a wall something that's similar to something he had seen before. He had to have seen it before, otherwise he wouldn't recognize it. It was not any shape, it was the shape of an animal. Not any animal, it was the shape of a bison. Not any bison. It was a bison that reminded him of the bison they had killed before in the winter before, when they were very hungry. By looking at that shape, he even thought of the feast, how people danced around that meat and how happy they were. And then he looked around it, he looked at it again, and he just saw cracks on the wall. Not happy with that, he picked a blunt rock or something, and he completed that form with a tail or tusks or whatever. And all those memories came back. That man was the first artist. And I think when you come to think of it, the invention of representation is perhaps the most important thing after the control of fire. What was fascinating about that form is that when he brought his tribesmen to look at it, they all could see the same animal, and they could partake the same memories. That allowed man to actually exist and pass these experiences beyond his life cycle. It's because of that we have history, that we have all the pillars of our civilization, politics, economy, religion. Art is very important. And when I define art by being this this evolution of this interface between mind and matter, I'm describing something that has to do with belief, and I find it very important. We have managed to polish this thick layer that separates what we feel and what we think and what's outside of us to a very thin membrane called photography. In 1839, we actually made this beautiful object, and I still think of it as objects because I am a maker of objects. They are almost as thin, as ephemeral as an idea, and yet they can convey any kind of experience of depth, of time that you can imagine. Photography is the last material interface between mind and matter. Digital reality, digital technology has bursted that membrane. We no longer have a material between what we think and what we feel. This will have severe implications in the way we understand history and the way we organize our history, both personal and collective, in terms of documentation. But this is subject for another lecture. I think of, let me go back. When I arrived in New York, I have the attention span of a fruit fly. But let me go back to when I got into New York. I rented a studio and I decided to become an artist. I painted the walls white. I picked up a chair, modern chair, and I sat there and I said, okay, now I'm going to make some art. Sat there. Art, come. Art is not something. Art is a process. So I figured that the only experience that I had before, it was with advertising and psychology. And my first art objects, I decided not to make them in images. I decided to make objects that had identity crisis. That they were somehow, there was a discrepancy between what they were and what they represented. Oops. This is the clown skull. It's a remnant of a generation of entertainers in Brazil, long time ago. This is the Ashanti joystick. It's so old, it's made for Atari. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica, book binded in a single volume for travel purposes. This is the pre-Columbian coffee maker. They think in New York City, a lot of the coffee is Colombian, it's pre-Columbian. This is the Tupperware sarcophage. For people who think that the afterlife is going to be a long journey. And this is the nail fetish. And this is the half tombstone for people who are not dead yet. When I was doing these works, I found a gallery that wanted to represent me, and then I finally had a show, and the really apotheosis of these objects was the day the photographer came to take a picture of them. when he came, his name was Peter Muscato, I remember his name. He came with 2 assistants, lights, and it looked like me here right now, you know? It was amazing. All the attention was in the object. And obviously, when I saw the object when I saw the pictures that he took, they were so sharp and beautiful, I didn't care about the objects anymore. At the same time I was doing this, I had a hobby, you know. The first book I bought in New York was The Best of Life, a book that many of you have in your bookshelves. It's a collection of Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs that you're tired of knowing of these pictures, but sometimes just to reload the memory of them, you just pick up and you look at it. Oh, remember that, remember that. When I moved to Chicago, I didn't know anybody, and I got this book in a garage sale because I felt that I could go around and ask people, perfect strangers, and go like, do you remember that? You know? It was just having like it was the family album of the family of man. So I lost the book, and I decided to make all the pictures that were from what I remembered. So they're memory renderings. Some of these pictures, actually, I had drawn them before, so I could kind of draw them well, right? It took me 2 years, and I used to do them on weekends, like somebody who does the crossword puzzles for the New York Times. And I would just pick one, every time I remember something, I would add to it. And I added using a pen or a pencil. Certain things, you know, I worked more on them. Facial expressions are very hard to remember. And then I was trying to understand how we remember, what does the pictures inside your head look like? And how they develop as you actually get some hints. Some pictures are easy, you know. This picture, for instance, you get a bunch of people, you just give them, 3D glasses, and then you shoot them. Well, I had these drawings, they really look bad because they were all full of erasures, they have whiteout, and my gallerist at the time wanted to show them do a show with them. I didn't want it because I also had grown attached to them, so I had a really good idea. I said, I photograph the drawings, I sell the pictures, I keep the drawings. It's a good deal, right? But when I took the picture slightly out of focus to take my hand out of it, and when I printed them with the same half-tone dot pattern that was the language in which I had seen these pictures for the first time. So it's like an idea gone full circle. I see these images, I remember them, and I turn them into pictures that were done with the same dot pattern. It was interesting that you also understand a lot about the way you remember things. Like when you see these things, you know this picture, right? You know, the guy with the little bag in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square. This is what happens. It's completely different. That's why I never got sued by AP or any of the photographers that actually took these pictures. You know, because the pictures look really, really different. But the thing that's impressive is that I had gone halfway to meet the memory of the person who's in front of the picture. That's very important. It's about this thing about going halfway. You know, I think the artist only makes 50% of the work. The other 50 is the viewer. There's no art experience without a viewer in front of it, and you have to be considerate of the viewer's visual baggage when he comes to this encounter. Therefore, most of my work is based on icons, archetypes. I never do anything that shocks you because it raises defenses. So I'm always working with the utterly familiar, so much in the way of iconography as it is for materials, you know. When you look at clouds, for instance, you know, this thing about meeting halfway, you always seeing things in clouds. But there are ways also how to dismember, create a grammar of seeing. It's very interesting. I wanted to make these clouds out of cotton. They were slightly too obvious, you know. But in a way, they had to be made out of cotton. And there would be something, at the same time, you would see a guy rowing a kayak, a lump of cotton, and a cloud. But when you see the guy rowing the kayak, you lose the cloud and the lump of cotton. When you see the cotton, you lose the guy rowing the kayak and the cloud. We have a handicap called attention that only allows one meaning to pass through at a time, but you can control it, which is pretty cool. You know, that's why you have visual illusions like the Necker cube or that vase with two faces that you can see it either way. These are called multi-stable images. By working with multi-stable images, you also, or multi-stable languages, you empower the vision to see what he wants to see in the image. If you orchestrate a narrative of these multi-stable experiences, you're actually creating a very interactive experience, even if you're doing a very still image. The other thing, there's no such thing as a still image, A frog does not eat a dead fly because he doesn't like the taste of it, because he cannot see it. Our eyes are not tuned to see things. It only see events. Something, we have like this tiny different movements that our eyes have, that we animate the whole universe with it. We depend on movement to be able to see. This is Ghiberti's Door of Paradise. It's an amazing piece of art in Florence because he mixed two types of languages. One was a very old, which was a relief, alt relief, and the other is one-point perspective. But he combined these two things, it's totally overkill. So you get trapped between these two readings, and then you have to find a way out of it. See, I didn't have a grant from the Pope in 16 years to do a door like that, so I decided to do something simpler. I compared drawing and photography. Something that's very easy to overlook is a pencil drawing. If I do a pencil drawing, if you do like maybe a likeness of one of you, you're going to judge that pencil drawing by how much it looks like you. But you miss the whole point. It's magical. It is said that when Giotto used to make frescoes, and they were at floor level, they had one-point perspective, people would just walk and bang their noses against it because they weren't used to that. We have virtual reality, we have fat shark goggles and things like that. We don't get fooled by it, but it is something interesting that to think that even if I do something with my hand like this, if I make a circle and make lines radiating from this circle, everyone here can see the sun. The sun is a huge ball of fire hanging 8 light minutes from here. But I can bring the sun here with a single gesture. That is magic. And it was much more magical when we didn't have, virtual reality. Believe me. But it's interesting to go back to certain principles of representation so we can understand where we are right now. When you look at something that initially looks like a pencil drawing, and this is how big these things are. They're about this big. And right after that, you say, wait, you go what's called a double take. You just go, oh, it's a pencil drawing. Wait, it's not. It's a wire. How big was it? How long did it take to make? When was it done? Photography creates a layer of ambiguity that makes you think about the picture instead of just looking at it. So I did this monkey with the Leica. I tried to make naked people in these glasses here, but it was very hard. The pliers didn't really. And I realized too that I always work in series because my main interest is not creating products or objects, actually creating processes. And working in series allows me to use what I learn from one piece into the next. And there's a curve, when you start working, you're very excited, but your work really is not very good. You're trying to learn how to do it. And then it gets to a point that you're really doing it well, so the work at the end of a series is very nice, and then your interest sort of goes and you don't want to do it anymore because you're doing it too well, or it becomes just work, When I started doing, I thought maybe I can explore this a little farther. And I decided to do other subjects. I tried to do landscapes with wire. They're very hard and they look really bad. And I started to do them with just sewing thread. By just accumulating sewing thread over a surface, you create two different topographies. You create two different perspectives. One is a topographic one of the material, thread itself, and the other one is the landscape that inspires you to see space in it. Let me see. So I named this after the number of yards that I used to. I always give titles that are very diminishing to the material. So it's called 6,300 yards after Coho, or 10,000 yards after Gerhard Richter. It's interesting that the collectors, some collectors, they would buy one that doesn't look that good, but has more thread in it. Well, you know, and my work sort of develops pretty much the way representation did. You know, from lines that gets a little bit more complex, you get to points, you know. Maybe it was my familiarity with the photographic medium that got me into this. But I came back from Europe to New York in a very deep recession in the early 90s. And I was about to quit when I did something that artists should do when they're really having doubts about what they have to do. I took a vacation. So I went to St. Kitts and stayed 15 days with some kids there. And I took pictures of them, as you do when you go on vacation. And when I came back, the last day that I was there, these girls, Valentina's, I used to go to the beach and play with them. I knew all their names. And so the last day, she took me to see her parents. And they were completely different than the kids. They were weary, sad, heavy people. And the reason for that they spent 16 hours a day harvesting sugarcane. And when I came back to Brazil, I was just reading this poem by a poet named Ferreira Goulart, which he asks where the sugar comes from. And he says, does it come from the store? Does it come from the warehouse? And then he ends up the poem saying, it's with the bitter life, with the bitter people, that I sweeten my coffee in this gorgeous day in Ipanema. And I was drinking coffee, and I just decided to get a piece of black paper and draw from the little source images, the pictures of the kids. That saved my career, those kids, because I remember, having 6 of these pictures. There were 7, but the 7th one, I banged the tripod when I was about to shoot. The whole thing shifted, and I didn't have time to redo it. And I did it. I showed this in the back of a gallery in Soho, and somehow the reporter from the New York Times saw it, and he wrote a beautiful review. And you never know, you know. And then 3 weeks later, I was invited to be in the new photography show at the Museum of Modern Art. And 3 months later, I had a mid-career, 7 months later, a mid-career retrospective at ICP. You know, mid-career, that was like I hadn't done anything yet then. But it was, I mean, I owe everything. For me, it's great to know that these works are now hanging in St. Kitts at the library there as much as they are at the Met. Tate has it, the MoMA has it. There's something else. When I had a show at ICP, it was the first time that I was considered, I felt people, like curators from the Museum of Modern Art, curators from the Metropolitan, people like Maria Morris, Hamburg, Peter Galassi, they were coming to me and saying that I was a photographer. And I was very insecure about it because I never studied photography. You know, I just learned everything by trying. And I remember an incident at the opening when I was feeling really good about it, but then there was something missing. A little before that, you know, there was a UPS driver named William. He was a fellow from Jamaica. He used to come and help me with some, he used to bring some things. And then one day he had to help me with some boxes to the 3rd floor where my studio was. And then he saw one of these pictures, and he looked at it and he said, what is that? And I said, what do you think it is? Because I never answer a question without a question, you know. I always, is this some art or something? And I go, what do you think it is? And he goes like, and then we went on until he really liked it. And by then I developed a relationship with him that every time he would come up, even if he was bringing an envelope to me, he'd go, what are you working on, man? And then one time I was showing one of these thread pieces in a gallery. I had made a big one, you know, and then he came and he looked at it and he said, I don't like this one. And I said, why not? And he said, because before you doing them small, there was a relationship between the thread, the size of that real thread, and the thread in the picture. Now you blew it up, you know, it's not good. Sure thing, I said, listen, I have to do this in a show. I had to put the picture in a show that same afternoon. And sure thing, the evening after the opening, I sat across a very famous New York art critic. And then he looked at me, he said, you're Vik, right? I said, yeah. And he said, oh, yeah, I've been following your work. I like the stuff you do, but that work, I didn't like it. And I said, why not? And he said, because, when you're doing them small, they had the same relationship between the thread, but now it's looked like you split it. And I said, you got to be really right, because my UPS driver said exactly the same thing. The guy never spoke to me again. But this whole story is to say that when William came to my opening at ICP, he brought the 7th Sugar Children, which is a picture of his daughter that I made for him. And he bought it hanging on the mantelpiece of his house. And for me, to know that this piece was hanging at the museum, and hanging at the mantelpiece of his house, and it was pleasing both people, was the most complete experience I've ever had as an artist. From then on, I still thinking that I decided to make art for my mother. If children, when a show is good is when children or the maintenance people in the museum, they're excited about, because it affects people physically first. When you do that, then you can pile up any kind of theory, any kind of information on top of it. But first of all, you have to get to something physical, something like this. When I was doing the sugar things, surprisingly, it's much easier than to draw with a pencil. You should try, because you go like this, But then it tastes good. The only thing is like, when it's like thinking, if I want to make the pictures more complicated, maybe I could use something that evokes taste, something that makes you think of another sense, because pictures of things make you want to eat them. So I decided to do some pictures of, what kind of thing? I said, chocolate is a great thing because it's an industrial invention and it's a cultural invention. People think chocolate is romantic. It's brown and it's gooey, and it melts in your hand, And it's just an invention, People are conditioned to it. So it was culturally charged substance that I could use to depict things. So I depicted, Freud was the first one because I thought he would explain why people like chocolate so much. Jackson Pollock doing his messy eschatological thing. Crowds are very interesting too. So they're very tiny drawings that I have to do them very, very fast. And the pictures are a little smaller than the picture that you see. They're very large pictures, I showed them the first time at the New Photography at the Museum of Modern Art. And they're very, very sharp. They're shot with an 8x10 camera. So I learned how to use the camera just to do these pictures. And I remember once I was showing these pictures in an art fair. Normally, the wife wants to buy it and the husband doesn't want to buy a piece. But this case was the opposite. The husband wanted to buy a piece and the wife didn't want to buy it. And then she said, Harry, we cannot have this piece. And then they were discussing with my dealer, and he said, why not? I like it. I'm going to put it in my office. No, we cannot have it. We cannot have it, period, He said, why? He said, it's embarrassing. And I said, why not? He said, it's embarrassing. I cannot. Try me. He said, we have bugs. We have bugs in the house. And then my dealer thought, no, this is not chocolate. It's a picture of chocolate. And then she said, the bugs don't know. It's amazing what people don't know about pictures. This is things like, there are pictures that you do, it takes you 3 minutes. I wasn't even intending to do this. I was working on another Caravaggio piece, and I was finished eating. I just did that thing. And then 2 weeks later, it was also in the cover of a newspaper because it wasn't my intention to become a piece, but it did, But it took 3 minutes to do it. And then there are pictures you take 6 months to do it, and I have to sell them for the same price. It's really unfair. Like this one. This took 4 months. These are works that are done with, it's very hard to see on a projection, but they are done with just loose pigment. It was a discussion that I had with a painter friend of mine that told me that color pastels are the only things that show the exact intention of the artist. I was talking about Odilon Redon, So the color that is there is the color that the artist wanted to be there. Because everything else is, the painter paints with a color that's different when it dries, Because this painter, a friend of mine, was saying the photography is always different when it's developed. I said, well, paint is the same. So I just thinking about that, I decided to answer the question with the wrong answer, but it was fun. When I do this, it's very difficult. It takes 4 or 5 months to do. This one took 4 months to do. And you work with a mask, because if you breathe out, you ruin the piece. You just becomes a cloud of brown nothing. And if you breathe in, you die, because it's cadmium. So, and you have to use gloves, so you're very distant from the piece. But they're quite tactile when you look at them. These are very large photographs. And again, these are works that have to be seen in a museum setting. You have to walk towards them. You have to find out what it is, you know. When the same way you start like dissecting a picture, you know, you take pigment out of the medium, and I was thinking about paper. Paper is very important. It has changed considerably in the last 20 years. You know, certain photographic paper ceased to be produced, and also we don't even read news on paper. Most of you don't. You know, most of you do it on the phone. I can't. See, I'm an old guy. I have to read. I read my news on the computer, and then I have to read the newspaper. I don't know why, don't ask me, because I think it's what proves that that thing really happens. But paper is something that is changing so rapidly, and the idea of exploring the physicality, the idea of paper is very interesting to me. So I tried to do this many times before, to create these collages using just the stuff that's used to take media in, you know. It wasn't possible because first I tried just white and white. It didn't work. And when I tried to do these collages with different grays, I couldn't do it before computers because there are no absolute grays. You know, if you have a black, gray jacket, if you're in front of a white wall, it'll look different than if you are in front of a black wall. So with computers, you can break them into like 5 different tonalities, from white to black, with 3 different grays. And you can layer them. So this is a really insane collage that took about 4 months to do. You know, I moved from one studio to the next. It's funny, annoying thing, because when you move to a larger place, you start making bigger work. Immediately I stopped using substances and things. I started working with things, you know. The first idea was to work with toys. Toys are a sort of a medium because they are an interface between how children learn how to deal with reality. You learn to play with little cars before you can drive, or you learn to cook to pretend you cook with plastic pans before you actually do any cooking. But, you know, and I thought toys would be an interesting thing to work with. It would be a nice medium, to consider a toy as a medium. And the first piece I did was this toy soldier, and I did it with, there was a direct relationship between the subject and the material. And then I just realized that toys were good anyway, so I mixed a whole bunch of toys and started buying them. Besides, it was a great excuse to go to toy stores and spend the whole day there, buy stuff. You know, people say, oh, you're the guy who do art with weird things, you know. No, I'm not. The thing is, when you set yourself into these really absurd situations, you know, of like making drawings with toys, you're exposed to different processes. You're exposed to different experience, how to get to the artwork. And this is what's more interesting to me. You know, I set myself these premises to draw something with something strange, so I can put myself in a different mindset. When I was doing these pictures of toys, I thought maybe I can go bigger, and I no longer had to confine my creativity to the size of my studio. So I decided, I rented a place outside Rio in a very dangerous neighborhood called, nicknamed the Gaza Strip, because there are 2 drug factions that are on the 2 hills nearby. You can see tracing bullets on the night. It's quite beautiful, by the way. But I decided to draw with like junk, you know. So this place is next to the largest junkyard in Rio. And it was quite amazing because I also started working with a group of people from there, and they started to help me. So it has an interesting thing. It's an ergonomic relationship, which, you know, when you see like an oil drum, or let me go to this one, yeah, an oil drum or a piano, you know, you see more or less the size of the things, but also it gives you some clues of the perspective of this. These are not photographed directly from above, they're from an angle. So the drawing on the floor bears no likeness to what you're seeing here. The drawing on the floor is elongated, very long and very trapezoidal, and you cannot see the guy in it. You cannot see, the picture. So whenever I bring people to my studio to see these things, they look at this pile of junk meaningless, and they go like, oh God, what am I going to say to this guy? And then by the time they climb a tower that's about 20 meters high, 60 feet high, they see the picture, they go, okay, now it's a picture there. Although I'm Brazilian, I'm not that influenced by Brazilian art. I'm very influenced by art that was made in Europe and United States during the time of my life, especially 60s and 70s. Minimalism is something that's very, very important to me because it's this poetics of material and form and context and content that really is what inspires my work most of the time. When I think of Smithson's spiral jetty, for instance, I find it very a beautiful thing because Smithson, by making this sculpture in a remote place, he didn't make it just a sculpture in a place, he made a sculpture in our mind. I was invited to go see Spiral Jetty many times, and I refused to go because I made a mistake to go see the pyramids, and I thought they were too small because they ruined them for me, So I don't want to go there and see, but I wanted to do something like that. So I started making them in my studio, see if I could actually create the idea of this mind place. Obviously, it was kind of boring and lonely, so I decided to do something slightly grander. I spent a few years convincing a mining company in Brazil to allow me to use the entire equipment, all the facilities, because they have iron mines, they have these flat surfaces that you don't have to take any trees or anything. You can just draw right on it. And they have the tractors, they have the retro diggers, they have the helicopters. So I'm a very persuasive person. So I told them, can you just let me use everything? It started like this, and then, they said no first. Then it went better. So we plot these things with GPS, and we dig them. Some of them can be seen from a commercial aircraft, and some of them are even bigger than the ones you find in Nazca in Peru. But the idea is that you make something, that Smithson made in Oppenheim, all these land artists from the 70s and 60s, they made mostly geometric forms. Some of them are more symbolic, some of them are less symbolic. I wanted to make really stupid pictures, those clip art pictures. Because to go through an enormous amount of work, just to come up with this little hand that says sign here, or a ruler, or just some feet. Because then you de-emphasize the idea of subject and you go back to process. This is a very small one, it's a person right there. That truck there, see, it's about almost the size of this auditorium here. It's huge. Some of them are about 500 meters long. And it took me 3.5 years to do this. This is my favorite one. That's a truck right there. And it's all the standard size things, which I kind of find it very interesting. The idea of making big things are very fascinating. In 2001, I decided I was asked by Creative Time to do a project for New York City. And it was something that I wanted to do for a long time. I had tried before. It's actually to make a plane draw clouds in the sky. So it's something that you expect to see in the sky, but never in the shape of a drawing. So you all of a sudden you just walk around and you see, and it moves. So this drawing of a cloud just goes by. You go like, wow, what the hell is that? It's really good. I wanted to see that. So I started with this one, it looks like a sombrero. I'm sorry, it was the first one. Okay. But later one, I did this one, and it's a much better one. Yeah, it's a much better one. It still looks like a baseball glove, but this is one over Miami, and something that I keep doing. When things are that big, you're in it, you cannot see it. You're part of a big picture. But when you come to think of it, we're all part of a huge picture. that we're actually pasting it together. That goes for big things and goes for infinitely small things as well. This is the tool that I've been using at MIT. It's called a FIB, a focused ion beam. I could not afford that equipment, so I had to go there to be able to draw castles. That I've been drawing these castles with something called a camera lucida. It's a pre-photographic design device from the 19th century, and I use that every time I see a castle, I make a picture of that with a camera lucida. So whenever I travel, I take one with me. So I had a pile of these drawings. I didn't know what to do with them. So I decided to use this drawing, vectorize them, and put them on grains of sand. But to call them grains of sand would be an overstatement. They are probably grains of dust because they go airborne if I would just go like this. So it takes one stream of eons to make the picture. And when you see they're like all the pieces around, it's because at this scale you cannot clean anything. It's way, way too small. But to believe that there is, something that small that has an etching in it, I did the same thing. I did a picture of my daughter, Dora, and I made just her portrait, and I threw it in the Ipanema beach in Rio. And the entire beach became an artwork, because I hope when she's 16, she's there with her boyfriend, she's going to say to him, "Do you really love me? Can you find me there?" The same time I was working with the Department of Nanotechnology there, I started working with the Department of Biogenetics. My first idea was to do things with funguses or like growth, any kind of things that grow, and I was thinking of making videos of that. And I was lucky to meet a guy named Tal Denino. He's an amazing fellow. He has a TED Talk. I really advise you to look at what he does. He works with, his field of research is oncology, but he works with bacteria. And with him, I developed these works. They're actually, I wanted to work with live things. I didn't know that we could go so small. These are real pictures of living cells. So at first looked like that wallpaper that's in your grandmother's house, but when you get close to it, actually are liver cells. When we first did the first one, we said, "Oh, this is wonderful. Now we're done. We have to just do more." Our mistake. Liver cells are sluggish; they stay in the same spot. Cervical cells have cilia; they move about. Neurons, they don't divide. So every cell we do, we have to change the way we scan it. We have to change the way we grow it. But the fact that we can make pictures with living cells, and especially like this is done with stem cells, it's quite fascinating. And they're so sharp, you can see the nuclei in all of them. This is the last one I did. It's not even being printed, so you've seen it for the first time. It's a crowd in a soccer event, and look at that. It's really cool. It's amazing that, I call that colonies. I was talking about the idea of doing things so it puts you in situations. Like if I didn't think about making pictures with cells, I wouldn't be at MIT. If I didn't think of making pictures with garbage, I wouldn't be in Gramacho. For many, many years, for 20 years, all I made arts because I wanted to become an artist. After 20 years doing that, you don't have any more excuses. You are an artist. And you have to convince yourself what it is that you're doing, what it is for, what it does, And in that respect, I think I decided to do this project mainly because of that. I share my work with my public in museums and galleries, but I had never shared the experience of making it. And I decided to do it with a group of individuals that had nothing to do with art, whose main occupation was actually selecting recyclable garbage. And to expose them to the experience that I had to see what I did was really important. This is documented in a film called Wasteland that was indicated for the Oscars. I'm just going to go fast, I invited these people whose only experience with their own image is actually through small, minute pictures that they find in cell phones, they find in the garbage, to work their own drawings in this huge scale and then see themselves, but they didn't want to add anything to the equation. They had to do it with the stuff that they were dealing with every day. I think there's a trailer. We're running out of time, so I have to speed it up a little bit. I'm sorry. So I wanted to work with, did not add anything to the equation. So I went to the largest garbage dump in the world that was in Brazil that was about to close. And when we finished this, we actually auctioned the drawings. And they helped this community in many ways. I helped them directly, the people who participated in the film. They managed to buy houses, they changed their lives considerably. Their class, the cooperative of recycling that they worked on, actually we outfitted with better means to actually to produce money. And the entire class of the catadores was impacted by the film because not only they organized themselves in larger associations, but they also they were recognized as a working class. For me, the apotheosis of this film was actually the main character of the really important Brazilian soap opera. Brazilian soap operas, they have 45 million people every day watching. It's just like a Super Bowl every 5 days, So the main character, the best looking actor in Brazil is a guy named Cauã Raymond. He was a catador. You're doing something when you get the good looking guy to be a garbage picker, and I think it's largely because of the film. I'm going to jump through this, otherwise I won't be able to show you. I'm going to go speed this very fast because I know we're running out of time. By dealing with garbage, I kept thinking about the garbage that is inside, how we are looking through web pages, looking through magazines, trying to scan what's interesting to us, and everything is coming in, and it's not going out, Basically, when we did these garbage pictures, they were like high contrast. There were places were clean and places were dirty. In our subconscious, in the way we actually mine meaning from this vast wasteland, it's our image memory. We don't have that luxury of cleanliness. We can put things in the foreground and the background, and I wanted to make pictures that look just like the way we think about them. So I started to make pictures with magazines that had that kind of confusion. There are collages, they're made of, so every single piece is another image, so it's very distracting. So every time you look at something, it actually leads you to another chain of thought. So there's no images that are meaningless. And that has something to do with the impossibility of a pure image. When I did it with images that were from magazines, I decided to do images from photo albums. When I was this is me, by the way, when I was 2. I only had 9 pictures of myself when I was growing up. And when I started seeing pictures of other people for sale, I buy them all because I don't want them to go orphan. By now, I have 250,000 of them. I don't know what to do with them, so I decided to use them in other pictures so they can continue to be seen. Photo albums were passed from generation to generation like genetic information, and this is something that is over. It does no longer exist. So it was interesting for me to work with the idea of photography as the physical evidence of the existence of somebody. So I went to, every photo album is exactly the same. It tells the same story, only the characters and the scenario that changes. So I went to these very archetypal pictures, the wedding picture, the school picture, and depicted them with individual pictures. So you get something very universal done with something very particular. The same thing I did with postcards, which I also collect. When you think about Paris, if you're not seeing this picture, it's pretty much that picture. You see the Eiffel Tower, a curve of the Seine, but every single building in that picture, the mental picture, is probably not from Paris. It could be from Detroit, it could be from New York. You just make something Paris-like in your head that looks like Paris and make you happy with the idea. So this is pretty much to do that. So I did it New York City. It took me a while to do it because I still think of New York City with the Twin Towers. I can never think of it otherwise. And there are places that I have some familiarity with, especially this is São Paulo, the city where I was born. I'm going to go, this is another series that I'm working with, which has to do with reproduction. This is a brand new series. This has never been printed yet, which has to do with like the idea of leaving traces and the material together. And I just wanted to finish with this. This is something that I've been doing for the last 15 years. A few years ago, 15 years ago, I was walking with Lisa Dennison at the Guggenheim, and they were redoing the installation of the Tannhauser section there. And I saw a picture of the Ironing Woman by Picasso in the back. That somehow made me think of an experience that I had 40 years before, when I was 7 years old. I went to MASP, the Museum of Art of São Paulo, and Lina Bobardi, the architect, had decided to hang the pictures on glass panels. For a 7-year-old who visited the museum for the first time, I wasn't interested in pictures, but I was interested in the spider webs, the contraptions, the things that were in the back of each picture. I remember looking at the back of that picture saying, wow, this is so, can I take a picture of it? She said, yes. And I said, can I bring tomorrow my big camera and take a picture of it? She said, yes. So I came next day and I took advantage of it. I took a whole bunch of other pictures that were equally important. And for years, I started collecting pictures of the back of famous paintings without knowing what to do with it. And obviously, I was very invested in photography until I decided to actually make objects out of them. I had all the information I needed. So I started with Starry Night, at the Museum of Modern Art. It was amazing. I went to Kirk Vanderdoe and I said, can I take a picture of the back of the Demoiselle d'Avignon? And he said, sure, yeah, sure, Vic, you can do it. I felt so important. I have to say to you, I must be a really big deal, because I know it didn't take much persuasion. Right now, I'm doing an opening on June, an exhibition at the Maurits Huis in The Hague. And the pieces that I'm working now is Anatomy Lesson, which is fabulous. And I may do The Kiss at the Belvedere and the Scream, Munch's Scream. It's like so I'm building up a collection of the best, a collection of the photorealistic copies of the world's most famous paintings, the paintings that you don't have to look at them. What's interesting about this is that when a painter finishes a painting, whatever he does that is supposed to stay just like that forever. It's supposed to remain unchanged. When he varnishes it, that is supposed to stay. But there's a whole apparatus that is supposed to bring that painting into time. So you see it again and again, and you will be seeing in a century from now, you'll be exactly the same. Process, it was actually moves media. It's just as important as the images themselves. When you look at the back of paintings, they tell a story. They're different. They're dirty. They look like the studio where the artist actually made them. When I made these pictures, and I show them in a gallery, people walk in, and sometimes they just walk out. They think the installation hasn't happened yet. It's okay. It's fine. But when they look at it and they see on a label, they see little traces and evidences of something that could be a Van Gogh or a Picasso or a Rembrandt. They say, it cannot be. This is the goldfinch. And I did Girl with the Pearl Earring. And this is talking about a very persuasive, insistent, it's been 10 years since I'm trying to be here, and I'm very glad that I came. This is the Gioconda. This is what the Mona Lisa looked like in the back. It took me 6 years bugging the guys at the Louvre to do it. And then when I finally did, it's really amazing because it has that glass that's very thick. That thing comes out, it's state of the art. It looks like a James Bond film. And then it comes out like this. And the guy goes there, they do a lot of electronic things in the back. And it only comes out of that vault on the first Monday of November. Only a few people are allowed in. They have no security inside the museum, no maintenance inside the museum, only outside, and you have a little badge that you can walk the entire museum by yourself, which is like a privilege. But the day when we first went there, they thought we were going to do something bad to it, so they didn't trust us. By the time we started working on it, they started, the conservators, the people who work behind the scenes of the museums, they became a very important part of all this project because they started to help. You see, there's a band here. There's a little electronic band that monitors a gap that's joined by a butterfly joint that's right here. If that thing widens 1 micron, somebody gets an SMS. And so the guy who designed the band, the guy from the Uffizi, designed the band for the Mona Lisa, the real Mona Lisa. He designed the one for our Mona Lisa. So it was amazing. So we took the two of them to be compared, the following year, and more than half of the technicians thought that mine was the real one. Except that, there's a little antenna thingy here. It's a metal thing. I don't know if you can see it. When they put it back together, it was hanging on the other side. So they told me, oh, no, we put it the other side. So instead of fixing the one on my copy, I fixed it on the real one. I mean, it's the idea that what lays behind, it's very important. Makes me think of, it's time, right? Time is very important. I think it was 10 minutes ago, a long time ago. But thinking about time, there are watches that tell you the time. And there are watches, they're so beautiful, they make you think about time. And other than that, when you think about pictures, I think about clocks. They are supposed to have a function, And I think about, but they are very intricate mechanisms, as much as a painting is. They're in their mechanics, their organic composition, whatever is behind them is just as important as the front. And if to really understand media, we have to understand both sides of the bargain. I really thank you so much for being here tonight.